getting a picture on the TV. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, a giant leap for mankind.
Hello, everyone in France, in Florida, and around the world. Welcome back to JadaTalks for Paris Art Week. I am your host, Samuel Locher, alongside Dana Blickensderfer. Today we are joined by two of the co-founders of Jada, Jonatas da Silva. Sorry, Jonatas. Jonatas has the craziest long last name.
I told Jonatas is, we just go by Jonatas.
Yeah.
Jonatas, yeah, just like Cher or Oprah. Jonatas.
Yeah.
He's a legend.
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Yes.
He needs no
Let me give the legend his due.
Go ahead.
Brazilian American symbolist, artist, academic, public speaker, and published author, Jonatas. And Suzanne Khalil, artist, scholar, researcher, Ph.D., co-founder of Jada, resident of Portland, Oregon. We are joined together today to discuss the death of postmodernism and the birth of metamodernism. So, postmodernism brought forth a wealth of new, exciting ideas that carried us through the latter half of the 20th century. Taking into account the irony, skepticism, and post-structural concepts of postmodernism, metamodernism brings the conversation between the old and the new forward by considering many concepts such as the structure of feeling and the idea of a new sincerity that goes beyond irony. And so the conversation we're interested in having today is one where Jonatas will speak on behalf of the metamodern side of things, and Susie will speak a bit on behalf of the postmodern side of things. Right.
And we'll be breaking all those rules.
Yes.
I definitely expect that, Sam. I'm sorry.
Thank you,
Susie,
Sam.
Susie, that's such a meta-modern thing to say. We'll break all
Yeah.
the rules.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's an honor for us to be together, right? And in context of the Jada movement, the Jada manifesto, the Jada connection, the Jada art show right now, Jonatas is in Paris. We have works behind us that we've contributed.
Yeah.
Okay, Jonatas, you and I love talking about art.
I know.
And we go back, and to some extent this could be a therapy session.
100%.
It always is.
I want to share with the audience my appreciation for being part of Jada, which I think will help position this talk. John just asked me to get to know the Jada movement that he and Dana conceived of. And in doing that, I was introduced to meet the core founding team, and then immediately to jump into a dialogue with artists who are planning to exhibit in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And that invitation to participate in a real-time chat, just leveraging WhatsApp as our platform for engaging, was a prescription for a daily vitamin that has been an anchor during quarantining and during the experience of witnessing all that's going on politically, socially, culturally. Anyhow, so we've been involved in an ongoing chat, and the ongoing chat's been on WhatsApp, and Jonatas has facilitated the dialogue about what is it like to be a maker in this time period. I probably bring more history because of where I am, my station in life, having been embedded in postmodernism longer. And I felt it was a great opportunity to reflect on what I've been through as a maker, psychologically, and also in terms of just being part of a community of makers, what I've witnessed as a change in the making experience. So Jonatas, I just want you to begin by sharing how it is that you came to postmodernism reflection, and how you came to the point of saying it's time to talk about leaving postmodernism. I would love to talk about my experience too, but you're the one who invited me to consider this. So,
well, thank you, Susie.
let you hit it off.
That's a great way to introduce the subject, which is so complex. Where do we even begin? But this is a good question. I think that's a good starting point. And what I will first say is that I tried. Let me put it that way. So I grew up making art, and I was influenced by various Western narratives, as well as native narratives from the Americas especially, right? Growing up in Brazil, we're very influenced by that kind of color from the Tropicalia movement, which really embraces this Latin American kind of language. But also within the narrative of the West, right? It's positioned within the West.
Yeah.
And when I came to the US, brought here by my parents, I developed myself as an artist. And eventually, it would lead me to go to graduate school for fine arts, for visual arts. And it was at that moment when I was told to start thinking differently. The first time I heard about the idea of removing authorship from artwork for the sake of a collective art show was during graduate school. And that was interesting. It was an interesting proposition.
Wait, let's push pause on that for 1 second.
Yes.
Because I'm witness to your artwork, and I was witness to your art making prior to graduate school.
100%, yes.
It was incredibly autobiographical, and it was a platform for you to tell an important story that hadn't been shared so widely. And so for you to be asked to partition that and to start making from a different space was asking you to separate from an identity that had defined your emergence as an artist.
Yes, when you met me, Susie, since day one, the context was that my art was all about this identity, the immigrant identity, the diaspora identity. So self-reflection about my personal history was always at the very center of my production. It was at the center of my conversation with my audience. Perhaps even at the center of the purpose that I tried to find the meaning of my own art making. So when I went to graduate school, which I thought was something very important, I don't regret at all. I still believe that engaging in conversation with others and deep learning, even if they don't agree with you, is still more important than not doing that. Because it shakes you up to your core and then it helps you find yourself. But at that moment, when I was asked to let go of authorship, I couldn't grasp that very concept. I didn't know what else art was for. For me, art was and still is the main means of communication for myself, to how I deal with the world around me, and also the things that are within me, right? How to process it and invite others for conversation. So when I was told, let go, and let's now create as a collective. So many interesting questions came to my mind. Is the curator going to be the ultimate author of this, let's say, show? And then I was introduced to the concept of the double agents, the artist, curator, and all of that. These are all postmodern ideas. And they helped me in such a great extent, for instance, to create collaborations, right? To let go of the idea that you are the star of a show, that the idea itself is more important than who is behind it. So to a certain extent, and I believe every meta-modernist artist has to say the same thing, I'm incredibly grateful for much of what I learned from postmodernism.
Likewise.
Right? We all have to have this gratitude for being pushed to think outside our paradigm. Postmodernism does that by removing all structure and saying, now do something about it. You have nothing to hold on to. Now go and work.
Yeah.
So as an exercise, this was great.
Yeah.
But it also helped me realize that I'm not at all a postmodernist. Not because I couldn't let go of authorship, but because I could not let go of identity in my art. I could not let go of the mission that I believed I had as a maker.
So, interestingly, the different experience that I had was that I emerged in the 80s. It was like 1989 when I began my studies in the arts. And I was deeply wed to philosophy. And emerging as an artist with a strong connection to philosophy. And my affinity in the arts was towards working in photography. But I was interested in the concept of representation, not what I was pointing my camera at, but in representation itself. And this was in an era when we were working in dark rooms, which was like a cave, and exposing images, and this magical appearance of an image would happen. It was somewhat sacred. You'd be in a dark space. There might be a couple people around you. You could hear the drip of water. It was completely dark. And like I'm saying, suddenly an image would emerge. And you'd go from lack of image to image. And okay, so that's the exposure process.
Yes.
We were working with film, and you could take hundreds of photographs and be lucky if one photograph was going to be the winning photograph for your mission, for what you were seeking to represent. So there was this whole practice, very deliberate practice of capturing images, very different than now, right? And so my working methodology was incredibly controlled. My interest was philosophical. And at its core, the relationship between philosophy and making was about representation. Mm-hmm. So I was perfectly primed to be a postmodernist. Yes. The ingredients of what I was interested in were the core ingredients of the postmodern maker and experience. I queued up a little sequence. Do you want to see it?
Yeah.
It's not my work. It's not my work. I figured if we're going to talk about art, we should see some art.
There you go.
So let me show it. Let me just not talk about it. Let me just show it. Give me 1 second here. And let's see if I can quickly screen share something that I want to share. Right. This is you should sing while I'm doing something like this.
Sing.
Let's see here. My whiteboard. Not ready to queue it up like I thought I was.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, here we go. Well, you're going to see something I didn't intend to share, but it's nothing embarrassing. Yeah, there we go.
More exciting.
See it.
You remember these images?
Yes.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go through some of this. Let's, 1 second here. I might have to ask you to shut your eyes for 1 second. I don't want you to give me a surprise here. Not really surprised here. Let's start from this one.
I'm shutting my eyes.
There you go. All right.
Eyes are closed.
So,
can we look?
So, are you all familiar with Dwayne Michaels?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Of course. I saw this sequence early on, and this sequence had a profound impact on my making. And I would absolutely characterize this as this is postmodern presentation. All right. So I'll just walk you through it. Right? It does something. That transition. Yes. Oh, Sam, you're back.
Sorry.
That's all right. You know, you're not supposed to go backwards, but hey, we're having a meta-modern experience, so it's technology. So Sam, this is the first image.
Yeah.
Right, this is the work of Dwayne Michaels. I'm just using it as an example of work that influenced me early on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. So that's the first image. It's a sequence.
Yeah.
That's the second image.
Yeah.
And that's the third image.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Oh.
Right. So we can pause here, but then we don't.
No way. That's amazing.
Right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It
and then
going.
here we are.
Wow.
So that sequence made a strong impression on me, because I recognized the level of control we can have in the viewer experience.
Yes.
To get them to reflect on what is representation and the power the artist holds in taking the viewer on an experiential trip where they're questioning the reality and at the same time building an understanding of the medium and of sequence and narration. So
I have a Susie Khalil quote that I have in my notes that I wrote this down. I didn't even tell you because I wrote it down to share with my friend who's a photographer. My best friend is a photographer. I've told you. And you said it's not really the craziest idea in the world, but I just love how you put it. You said you were talking about how photography works as a representation of physical form.
Yeah.
And I mean, it seems very, I guess, but like the way you sum it up like that, it does make you kind of look at photography different. And this, what you're showing us now, this sequence, I'm glad you're here to help walk us through it because it is it's very thought provoking, but you kind of swim on it a little bit.
So, when I think of postmodernism, I think of an obsession with questioning our materials and an obsession with really controlling the experience of the viewer.
Yes.
Tremendous amount of irony and unexpectedness and a surprise. And I think of deconstruction because you are working so carefully with your materials, and if we're going to take out the identity story and our origin stories and what makes us unique as makers, that doesn't leave us a ton to work with. What we end up really working with is the material itself.
Yes,
that's true.
So
yes, and this material is quite difficult to deal with if you prolong for several decades, right? Postmodernism has it took root by the 80s. It was really the predominant way of thinking. Yeah. Well, and I guess in fairness to think about postmodernism, we should at least share an image from what we say like modernism, right? I mentioned I come from photography, so I may as well. I'm going to just share just one other photographer that impacted me, Sandy Scoglin. So this is an image that we would, arguably, I think she'd be quick to say, yeah, this was very modernist. This is when she take a 78. Sandy Scoglin, as a postmodern artist, was working before Photoshop, right? Before we had the control of our digital medium. This is Revenge of the Goldfish. And I remember thinking she is working with her hands. That wasn't my thought when I first saw this image, but just because I know her process. She created this environment. She sculpted all those goldfish. She painted the scene, etc. Now in Photoshop, we'd have such an easy time just mocking this together. But her level of control over the space and the engagement and the performance of creation fascinated me. This is the 80s. And now I just want to jump forward to a conversation about metamodernism. Sandy Scoglin has this blue bulb from True Fiction too. And this actually is a remake of something she did in the 80s, but she's doing it in the, what I would say, meta-modernist tradition of trying to reinvent the materials to tap into what she had done in the past. Kodak doesn't even make the chemistry anymore, which she had used. And the concept of true fiction, that almost screams genuine fake, right? Oh, yes.
Yeah, when we think of genuine fake and what's going on with streetwear, street culture. Anyhow, so I actually was influenced by Sandy Scoglin. I worked on the wedding with her. The images, and then I had this just lined up to talk to you all about.
It's powerful.
Yeah, so Steve McCurry, like this image on the left, it was arguably one of the most impactful images. The Afghan girl.
Yeah.
And yet, in the ivory tower, we wouldn't have considered this in the same way we would consider work that you'd find in MoMA. I love Steve's work. And the general population be very quick to identify the image on the left. But it was outside of postmodernism. And so there was a disconnect between imagery that was being celebrated in kind of popular culture and postmodern art that was being revered in the ivory tower. And so there was so much energy coming through her eyes, right?
Yes.
And this other edition, I think it's 1990. It's on there. No, it's 2002.
This is 2002. Yes.
2002 found.
Wow.
Impacted me personally because it was a cue up to consider how art has made a difference in helping draw attention to needed activism or art itself being leveraged for activism. This story goes on to tell about how her life was changed because of that photograph. But the cover itself was incredibly telling. And anyhow, I'm going to get off of this share here. Just wanted to put some imagery into our conversation. So the postmodern experience I had was in grad school was a little different than yours. At least it wasn't disruptive for me. I had already been making art that was like in that river. The work that I had done came from a profound experience in the darkroom where I had emulsion on a canvas and I had made a mistake. I had the temperatures wrong, and it was a photograph of myself with my boyfriend at the time. He's now my husband of almost 30 years. And because the temperature was wrong, our images melted off of the canvas. So I had painted photographic emulsion in it, and it melted off. And then I had worked with this concept of images that fade, images that disappear, images that are disturbing in that way. And I started to get my feeling as an artist. Behind Jonatas, top left corner, you can see one of my images. It's the amputee who had been hoisting his body up. You don't have to show it, Jonatas. I just want to. But there was no color in it. There was no color in any of my work. It was all very monochromatic. But there's also a lack of connection to my personal passions. I was leading viewers through an experience of looking at images that cross-referenced one another in a similar way that Dwayne Michaels did. I didn't work with sequences in the way he did. Mine was, I'd create a gallery space, and by experiencing each image, you had a gestalt that was cross-referential, and you kind of questioned, had I been looking at a photograph? Were these drawings? Were they coming into existence? Were they fading out of existence? Anyhow, so that all worked for me as a maker until a certain point. And this came out in our chat. Remember, we had a chat where you had asked. Really, I think it was like the. I don't know what your prompt was. I'm sorry, but it had to do with. Where, do you remember the prompt? Where are you as a maker? Or,
I believe it was. I believe there was a quote, and then asking everyone who's part of the chat to comment on how they identify themselves with postmodernism and then with metamodernism.
Yeah,
I believe so. We had so many conversations. We've been having so many conversations. It's difficult.
Yeah. Okay. So let me we'll go backwards in time here. We can do that. Here it is. I was wondering if you could remember what the prompt was, but I wanted to read this. This is what I wrote. We were texting. This was not supposed to make it into a Jada talk. We were just having fun communicating.
Texting.
Yeah, we were just texting. But you had asked something that had me reflecting on where postmodernism took me. And I just wrote this. I didn't think too much about it. I'm going to read it and share it with this conversation here. So as a maker during the 90s, my work was very igniting, at least it was to me. I was young and exhibiting in museums early, and things were aligned for me. Let's leave it at that. So postmodern deconstruction of photography was my thing. Yes, I've explained that. It was natural because I was and continue to be deeply philosophical. But now I'm at a different place. I'm reborn with this digi-romantic bent. I have a craving for freedom to be raw and less defined and less calculated. And the truth is, I've always loved charcoal. I love getting my hands dirty. I love mark making. I love the smell of paint. Anyhow, this new era that I'm going to determine for myself is past postmodernism. I don't want to determine it for others, but my experience of making is past postmodernism. It's a renewal of creative spirit to usher in metamodernism, to movement, acknowledged sensibility that's born personally as much as culturally. Now, here's the sentence that I shared with you all that is still with me today as I think about what I want to share with a larger audience. I've lived through postmodernism, and I became despondent as an artist. When I deconstructed all that I could, I was left with the same tools I started with, and I was mentally exhausted and spiritually incomplete.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I said it was so easy for me to write that. I could not interrupt my day quick enough to write that, because with your invitation to pause and reflect on postmodernism, and for me to inventory the excitement of making today, not being so calculated. Being a conceptual artist is an incredibly calculated and rigid experience.
Very much.
And
measuring your very movement.
Yeah, for that series of Dwayne Michaels is so highly controlled, and it was encapsulated, and it was elegant and beautiful, and really worked to get a viewer to challenge sequence in of itself. But and when I would work, whether it was painting a 30-foot line and having magnifying devices there to examine the line and a whole construct around it, I was separating in the way you did from your work to be part of a postmodern collective in ways that weren't spiritual. And so, here's a book I love called Last Lecture. Have you read that book?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I love that book.
It's a great book.
And even in Pittsburgh, where you used to live.
That's right. So I lived down the street from where he taught. He taught at Carnegie Mellon. And Last Lecture he wrote, I really believe he wrote it for his children as the last lecture of life suggestions of how to live a meaningful life. One of the takeaways from that book was to really question how you use your time, because time is the most precious thing we have. It's our most precious resource. As an artist, during this time period of incredible agony, I felt that my work had become navel pondering. And I just couldn't justify being so focused on my materials in the way that was just about materials.
Yes.
Not just what I've always loved about your work. And your work arguably was done during a period of metamodernism. I don't believe metamodernism is just starting. I believe metamodernism started a slew of years ago, but with every movement, there comes a time where it just emerges as more dominant.
Yes.
Your work, I believe, has had incredible sentiment in it and authenticity from the moment I met you, prior to you going into your master's program in the effort of others to indoctrinate you into postmodernism. You resisted something because you were born in a different era. I don't believe those who are no disrespect to those who are educating you, but I don't believe those who were educating you understood the importance of learning from their students what the new dialectic was going to be about. I imagine that you challenge your educators as much as your educators tried to challenge you, but you were in a power relationship, and as a graduate student, disempowered in your relationship. Anyhow, so I'm not trying to prescribe that onto you.
No, I cannot think of any other way to formulate what actually happened. You're absolutely correct about that.
Well, you really wed the two. I was at your graduate show, and
as you were.
You're far past being a student now. I don't think of you as a student no more than I think of myself as a student. But we were always students.
Sure.
But
we better be.
Yeah, we better be. But you had to share with others. You had a tent. It was a proverbial tent, and it was a sacred space where you told your story on the exterior of the tent and your journey story within the tent.
Yes.
And the tent could be wrapped up and taken somewhere else, or
as I did before. I keep doing, yes.
Yeah.
It's luggage and then it expands anywhere.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think that the fluidity of making art that travels and emerges and changes in real time based on the technology that's surrounding it is part of metamodernism.
100%.
Yeah. Go ahead. I want to hear more of your voice and less of mine at this point.
Well, no. But first of all, Susie, your voice is never enough to just have a few minutes of you speaking. We learn so much. Your depth is really refreshing. Let me put it that way. In a world that is so quick to make statements without backing up with experience and facts, and the way you talk is you simply add weight of not only intention but often of experience with as an academic, as an artist, as an observer of the world. You have placed yourself in so many situations where the ultimate result was growth. And when you speak, we witness some of that and we grow ourselves. So thank you so much for giving us some of your insight, some of your personal experience.
Thanks, Jonatas.
Yes, it's a privilege for all of us, and I'm sure our audience thinks the same way. Now, these starting points that we had when we speak about our graduate school experiences, right? It's supposed to be transformative. We were no victims, right? We placed ourselves in that situation to be challenged. And that is where my gratitude comes towards my educators. Now, am I highly critical of many of them? Absolutely. I do know that many of my educators don't approve of what I do, and that's totally fine. And today I am an educator myself, and I love it. I simply love it when a student challenges me in ways that I feel uncomfortable. It's so good, so dynamic, because I end up learning. I end up having to revisit a topic with a fresh understanding that perhaps there's a different way to see this.
Yeah. You know, one of those dangerous things that I think I think that art school can be incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous.
Yes.
And the sensitivity of the program is around exactly what you're talking about. The ability, what?
Sorry, not to cut you off. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go on.
No, Sam, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, we're getting close to the end of our time. I did have one question kind of bouncing.
You can go on for hours. I should have not let you say this. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question though. As two individuals who have, and also Dana, you went to the art school as well, who have gone through, the process of higher education, post-grad education. Susie, you even have a PhD, Susie. How, and also as teachers, how necessary do you think for a young artist it is for them to attend art school, to get that kind of like higher education after high school, to
I can answer. I can speak to that, and Jonatas, I know you can too. I'm going to speak to it as a parent right now, because I have a son who is about to go to art school, and I believe that the most valuable aspect of the art school experience is the critique. Bar none.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Critique. It is the value of exposing your work, being vulnerable to an audience, being able to critique somebody else's. And for me, as a parent, justifying sending my son to an art school, it is the most valuable aspect of that is exposing my son to community and putting him in a platform of people who, it's not that they're like-minded, because I think that's a dangerous thing, is to surround yourself with like-minded people, are passionate about the same aspect of culture. That to be able to participate in that community, that's priceless. It's not for learning of how to command a brush. For me, it is placing him in a context of valuing what he finds most important.
I completely agree.
And I would say,
what do you say?
Yeah, what I would say is exactly that. My gratitude for graduate school was exactly, first of all, the critiques. They're very valuable. Second, the exposure to audiences that are very sophisticated. To me, being an aggressive maker, and I define that as someone who just makes, and while your painting is drying, you're creating a film or a drawing or an installation. That has been my modus operandi for perhaps most of my life. In graduate school, it was necessary for me to pause and to consider what I was making. And that gave me a level of discipline that I carry with me to this day. I didn't stop producing in a way aggressively, but it does make me think in a positive way about the kinds of sophisticated audiences that I will encounter as I exhibit my work. And to think about the fact that we have a diversity of thinkers, of knowledge within our audiences. And that is one thing that made me want to be more interdisciplinary, even though I always was. But then I started adopting, in a more clear way, an interdisciplinary approach to my work, because I realized that if this is communication, I should add to my vocabulary, and that enriched my practice. So that I'm grateful for. What I would say when it comes to moving towards metamodernism, essentially the idea that we need sincerity. I wanted and I tried to believe that postmodernism was enough, until you get into a situation where you, as a young maker, or a maker of any age really, but living in the current times, we have so much anxiety, we have high rates of depression, perhaps because of the anxiety, we have so much uncertainty, and we have so much polarization, that we realize it's so important that we get together, that we value the opportunity to communicate with each other.
Yeah, the coming together, the connection. But you know what makes me want to take pause here is that as we move into metamodernism, the new modalities of engagement really are driven by memes. And what you and I are saying is so valuable about our school is a depth of critique and richer engagement. And so this remains a little bit an untold story of where metamodernism is going to go in terms of art education.
Sure.
Because if we talk about critique, is a thumbs up or thumbs down critique? I don't know. That's not critique to me.
No.
I want
Go
to
ahead.
be an advocate for a second, just because, not to deviate too much from postmodernism, metamodernism conversation.
Don't worry.
But kind of like the overarching topic of all the talks we've had today has been education. Higher education in the United States is very different than it is in the rest of the world. So as valuable as things like, the art critique is, the community you get from college, especially if you're coming from modest means, is it worth the tens of thousands of dollars in most cases?
Well, it's not even practical right now. Forget is it worth it? It's not practical. If we are buckled down in isolation and our experience of education is virtual, where are we in terms of maximizing engagement? Well, in my own sphere, I made the decision that an apprenticeship makes more sense right now. And look at the history of art makers. Apprenticeship models really are how the great masters came of age. And in terms of the COVID lifestyle, whether that apprenticeship model is, one-on-one or remote one-on-one, it's a very intimate way of engaging versus being one of 50 in an online sphere, detached from the material quality in addition. So,
well, what I would say is exactly, it's echoing what Susie said. Similarly, I would imagine that the education of the future will not be the education that we have today. Especially when we're talking about the United States, where instead of, you have to make a choice. Do I save to buy a house because my parents didn't save money for me to go to school? Or do I go and get an education and then I see what happens in the future? So it's just not practical. It's not practical. And we also have to understand that there's a sense of an urgent sense of the need for change. Because we simply cannot afford to move forward the way we have been doing things. And that is a meta-modernist kind of idea. We have technology on our side. We have people letting go of important experiences because they have to work so hard, study so hard, spend so much time dedicating themselves to an education that might not even have a practical use in their lives. When instead, they could, for instance, engage in training, such as what Susie just described. If we were to adopt the system of, let's say, badges, right? We have spoken about this before, Susie, and everybody else in Jada. We would still be able to value training. This training is called education in the end, but we would not let a system, a capitalist system, be so predatory in the lives of learners. So one of the things that the meta-modernist movement is doing is saying, we have the tools to change the system. We have the tools to change the establishment. And guess what? We are the majority. It is time for us to say, we want to have a meaningful voice within the cosmos of the 2020s and so on and so forth, because we don't want to keep going the way you guys have wanted us to go. And keep in mind that this is not a generational change. We have people of multiple generations joining this mentality. And Gen Zers now, the Generation Z, they understood, for instance, in the beginning of the pandemic, that via TikTok, they can create social change. Right? And you have everybody else just asking, what is happening? All of a sudden, you have boycotts happening. You have social movements happening via TikTok globally. So since we have now people saying of all ages again, we can change the world. So where is art going to go? What we want is a kind of art that again brings us to the point where we can converse, where we can create a fellowship, almost at a spiritual level, where we can look eye to eye, whether you are rich, poor, black or white, a Muslim or Jew, it does not matter. We all believe that our humanity is what will save us. Our humanity will unite us. Within our common ground is where we will find the hope for the future. So we want a kind of art that speaks about that common ground. We want a kind of art that will be sincere, honest, that will spark curiosity, that will ask us, what if I do think that way? Where are they coming from? So just the idea of questioning our reality and offering something different is the strength of the meta-modernist movement, but also valuing whatever is good for today from modernism, from postmodernism. And being open for what might happen in the future. And here's the thing, as we develop our ideology, we understand one thing, that it's open source. There's not one person leading anything. It's bring it into the circle. Let's read. Let's question what has been written, and perhaps that will be incorporated to this malleable, this flexible ideology that we're presenting, so that we can build at least the illusion of a certain structure, so that we can move on towards these next steps within the new era of metamodernism.
It is open stakeholdership.
Exactly.
And the phenomenology of the metamodernist movement, and as Jada, as it's been conceived, is that its meaning will emerge through the participation of those who choose to be stakeholders.
Yes.
And
one thing I just want to add to what you were saying, Jonatas, too, is, the United States, especially as it currently stands, has just these ridiculously inflated costs for tuition for colleges, right? But at the same time, what we now have is this democratization of information through the internet, right? Where things are so, like, I work in marketing, for instance. A lot of what I do is in marketing, and everything I do as far as, doing things like marketing campaigns online, search engine optimization, even editing videos, this is all self-taught that I've learned from YouTube or from other resources available to me for free on the internet. And one thing I see, a lot of my friends who go to FIU, for instance, that study marketing, their professors tell them to go online and get Google Ads certified.
Exactly.
Which anyone can do for free on the internet. It doesn't cost any money. So if you're paying that, I don't know what the breakdown is per class, but like for a 4-credit class at FIU, it's not cheap. No matter how you look at it, even if you get state or out-of-state tuition, you're paying that money for an online program that anyone can do for free. I'm sorry, I hate to be like so contrarian about this. You guys know her.
The idea here, Sam, is this. As a meta-modernist, I do value education and I value instruction. I do believe that you do have to go through a process that is constructivist, right? That it's experiential, it's hands-on, but there is a mentor, and you learn. And over time, you pile up information, and you go from simplicity to complexity. You build it up, you're exposed to different kinds of information, different mentors. So there's merit in education that says the same, you got this degree, but it might be translatable to badges, because that kind of structure can be simplified and become compact.
And you create a personalized menu of how you want to build identity.
Yes.
Have you read Mastery by Robert Greene?
Oh yeah, I have.
So it's exactly that, the 10,000 hours, apprenticeship, creative, and then the phases.
I'll tell you, though, that I have concerns about this construction of identity that is just driven by interest. It sounds wonderful. My concern is that the end result may be something like we're seeing in terms of political fixedness.
Yes.
That your environment that you expose yourself to is only that which you're comfortable with, and only that which reinforces the information you already believe. And one of the great things about being prescribed an education in which you don't have all the choice to just follow the interest you know, is being turned on to things that you otherwise would have never invited into your life.
Yeah.
And that, the big concern, so Jonatas, you did a wonderful art piece where I just saw it the other day. It's time-based. You begin with the radio. You're in the tub. You begin with the radio, then you go to the television, and then the internet. In postmodernism, we were obsessed with television. We were so concerned that we were going to narrate people's visual journey and experience of a narrative. We were so worried about our narrative was going to be too much a mediation in a person's developing narrative. Sounds very circular there, but that's what the concern was.
Yeah.
That it would be transparent that somebody created a visual pathway for you to experience with television. We had no idea what the bigger monster was around the corner, which was the feeling that you were going to experience information being in the driver's seat on the internet.
That's true.
That you were empowered to have that time-based, information-based experience. But the reality that we now know is that you have this illusion of being exposed to a wide web of information. And in reality, because of how, for lack of a better example, Google AdWords work, you actually have a very prescribed, limited experience that is totally based on your digital breadcrumbs and footprints.
Exactly.
And that it actually is an illusion.
It's self-referential.
A freedom of back. Yeah, a freedom to experience new information. In reality, it's information that is already serving a footprint you have made in that sand. And that perhaps is more dangerous. So in taking this to the education sphere, the one thing I hope we don't lose about the prescribed education of today as we go more metamodernist is forcing people to go into waters that they otherwise would have been uncomfortable going into in a way that's experiential. A great quote by Cornel West, one of my favorites of his. He taught at Princeton. His background was in philosophy, but I think he was teaching at Princeton at the time that he said this. He looked around his undergraduate class and his first day of class, and he peers in everybody's eyes and he says, "You are going to die in my class." Really get everyone. What a thing to say on the first day of class. He goes on to explain that unless you are willing to leave behind that intellectual self that has been defending your ideas, you will not grow in my class. That to survive in my class, you have to allow the person that walked through that door to die. You will be forever changed by being open to considering challenging your own viewpoints. And so that uncomfortable feeling is not something we readily invite into our lives. Perhaps it has to be prescribed.
What I've seen, Susie, is that we have a great opportunity right now to be able to cause a revolution of sorts. We also have to be we have to have a sense of responsibility, social responsibility, which can influence other realms of existence. But this platform that we have right now, right here, we are speaking via Zoom, and we are plugged into YouTube as the main Jada hosting system for Jada TV, for JadaTalks. Anybody can create this. Anybody can broadcast their voices. So the individual responsibility has increased 1,000-fold. The consequences of what we're doing will be felt deeply in our audiences and immediately. So I believe that what we have to do is exactly the meta-modern proposal, which is to create a kind of responsible structure with the understanding that we are no one to know what is right and what is wrong. So while we are building, we have to be questioning and educating ourselves. Are we doing this the right way? And we have to be switching gears and switching material, building material, as we try to create a new kind of structure. And understand that we have to be constant learners, avid learners. That's the responsibility of anyone who joins the movement and the quest.
Yeah.
In terms of raw sincerity, to be unapologetic for acknowledging that you might want to change gears and do something different.
Exactly.
And not so wed to defensiveness that we are the experts, that anyone is the expert, that there is an evolution in how to bring people together and how to have rich conversations.
Perhaps one of the vocabulary words that we should adopt in the meta-modernist Jada movement is that we do have a manifesto, we do have an ideology, we have a manuscript. But one thing that is important to mention is that this is good enough for 2020. It might have to be revisited for 2021.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So that's it. That's the main idea, that we have structure. We want to have a sense of we want guidelines, but we're discovering and formatting as we go.
And on that note,
Yes.
we have to close. We're 15 minutes over, but we appreciate Susie, Jonatas, thank you for your valuable conversation and discussion on postmodernism and the birth of metamodernism. But it was a great transition because tomorrow morning, which will be 3 p.m. Paris time, 9 a.m. Eastern time, and what time, Susie?
6 a.m.
6 a.m. your time. We're actually talking about the manuscript, The Rise of Digiromantics, with the same group right here, 9 a.m., 6 a.m., and 3 p.m. So join us then, and we look forward to our next JadaTalks keeps going tomorrow, and we're here all weekend for Paris Art Week. So thank you guys so much,
Yeah.
Bye.
and we'll talk
Okay.
soon.